All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. How you going, Martyn?
Going really well, Jake. It's St. Patrick's Day today, isn't it? All people with any Irish blood will be celebrating around the world. They're not just in Ireland; they're everywhere. Irish people, and in addition to that, it was my father's birthday. Sadly, obviously, he's no longer with us, but it would have been his birthday today. And my granddaughter, it's her birthday. She turns 11 today as well. So lots of celebrations, mate, for us, and memories of my old man, who's the real reason why I'm here today to talk about rugby league, because I was brought up in a rugby league household by a dad who was an absolute Wakefield Trinity fanatic. And obviously went back many years. So here I am. If he'd been interested in something different to rugby league, I'd have been on a who knows? I might have been on a podcast doing goodness knows what, but here we are, Jake, you and I together, and I think you had the same experience with family interest in rugby league, didn't you?
Yeah, mate, there wasn't a lot of choice in my household. It was very much follow what Dad followed. And
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
what, mate? I'm just glad that they didn't follow the other rugby code because, yeah, it's a bit boring for my liking.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. And of course, with your name, Kearnan is an Irish name. You must have a bit of Irish blood in you somewhere, mustn't you? I should think.
Yeah, mate, a lot of Irish heritage, a bit of Scottish and German.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but yeah, there's Irish
Potent
on
mix
both
there,
my.
mate. Potent mix.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to say, you could forgive me for, I guess, having some aggression about me, but I also think those traits make a really good person at parties. So um, I like to think I bring the life of the party. You mix
Yeah.
that the Aussie influence as well. That certainly helps.
Oh
I'd
God,
like to
yeah,
think.
yeah. 57 varieties, mate. That's what you are, I think. But yeah, great stuff.
Oh yeah, but oh well, we thank Mr. Sadler for his contribution to I guess creating you, mate, and your interest in rugby league. Because without him, we wouldn't have League Express.
No, 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 no. Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been great to be involved in rugby league all these years. And the only sad thing for me, mate, was that when I was a kid, I was foolish enough to pass my 11 plus. We used to have it in those days when I was younger, and I went to a school that didn't play rugby league and didn't even play rugby union. So back in those days, the only way you played rugby of either code was probably by playing it at school. And if you went to a school that didn't play it, my school only played soccer, and I was of very limited ability in that field. So my brilliance at rugby league never really was allowed to grow to fruition. So I had to write about it rather than and watch it rather than play it, which was such a shame in a way.
Oh, but it makes you wonder how many young athletes, weren't afforded that opportunity to play rugby league.
Loads.
Um, it makes you wonder if it wasn't every skill, how popular our game truly could be. Um,
Oh gosh, yes, yes.
but hopefully one day, mate. But mate, we had some Challenge Cup action over the weekend. We will dive into that a little bit soon. Obviously, off the field, there's been a lot of talk over the last 2 weeks or so about the NRL's interest in Super League. There's been some whispers here and there, but nothing really concrete as of yet. But this week's readers' poll asks our readers, what is the best thing about the Australian NRL competition? The answers are the size of the crowds, the quality of the TV coverage, the closeness of the competition, the skill levels of the players, and the quality of its administration. Um, what do you think would be the most popular pick out of those options, mate?
Well, I've not looked at the current state of voting, so I'm just guessing. But I would say probably, I think what probably impresses most people is the skill level of the competition, really. Although the size of the crowds and the quality of the TV coverage probably also counts for a lot as to why the Australian competition is so popular, certainly among British fans. A lot of British fans do watch it. And of course, there's all this talk, as we say, about the NRL moving in to take a significant stake in Super League over here. So there are a lot of elements of the NRL that I would like to see replicated over here. Um, and obviously, the skill levels in the game are very important. And I think that would count for an awful lot. So, that's what I would guess would be coming out on top. Jake, have you checked and seen what is leading the field at the moment?
Yeah, I had a brief look this afternoon, mate, so it's not the most up to date. But when I checked this afternoon, the skill level of the players had about 51% of the vote.
Yeah, good.
So you're right there. Coming in second, the quality of the TV coverage with 16%.
Right.
Actually, no, it could have changed, but so 16% of the vote went to that answer, and 17 went to the quality of its administration. So very much a neck and neck race there between those two
Mm.
options. With 10% of the vote is the closeness of the competition, and 3% for the size of the crowd. So
So people
um,
are not that impressed by the size of the crowds, which is quite interesting, isn't it?
yeah, well, that's the thing. Like from my experiences being over in England, the size of the crowd doesn't matter. It's how loud you are. 5,000
Absolutely.
people make it sound like there's 20,000 people in the stadium. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know, atmosphere versus size of crowd are two completely different things when you really break it down.
Mm.
And yeah, I've long said that the English do it better.
Oh,
So
yes, gosh. And we saw that in Las Vegas, didn't we, with the whole KR and Leeds fans who were
mm,
creating a terrific atmosphere on Fremont Street. And I think the Aussie fans in Las Vegas sort of just looked at the English fans and thought, gosh, these are incredible people, really, and they are. And it's a general trait of English support of sporting teams in this country. Of course, football fans are much the same. They give terrific loud support to their teams, and if you want to see an atmospheric game, football is. I tend to think that football is all atmosphere and not that much substance, to be honest. But whereas rugby league, I think personally has a bit more going for it. But then again, you look at the crowds in football over here, Jake, and you've got to say it's a hugely successful sport, and not just at Premier League level, but at every single level. It's incredibly well organised, well run, and draws great crowds, even at levels that are very much way below the Premier League level. So, but rugby league has, and that's the difference between our sport in Australia and England. We have to compete with all this football interest, and football in your country is at a much lower level of interest, and obviously rugby league and Aussie rules are the two main sports over there, and that's why you can draw great crowds.
yeah, for sure, mate. And I don't know what it is. Like even you look at cricket, for instance. It's both popular in England and here in Australia. But when the Barmy Army comes over, there's no one louder, and it just feels like English sporting clubs have so many different chants and songs and a long history. And it's almost like with our clubs over here, there is a long history for some clubs, but for some reason we just don't sing and we don't have
No, no.
songs we can associate, with our clubs. The closest thing we have is like a victory song, I guess you could say. And, you know,
Well, the Aussies have never been great singers, have they? There are very few great singers who have come out of Australia that I can think of. I mean, even the Bee Gees, they were great singers, but they actually came from England originally. So that's obviously they weren't in sport, but they took their lead from the Beatles back in the 1960s. Which I remember, and you obviously don't. But those no Aussies are funny in the sense that singing isn't part of the experience generally, but in England obviously it clearly is, and we had the whole KR fans in Las Vegas with Andy Bell, the Erasure singer, leading them in a terrific chorus, and you wouldn't get that in Australia, would you really?
no. And I think it actually makes a lot of Australian fans jealous, I think. Um, Obviously when clubs do win, they often start playing the victory song and fans sing along. But yeah, I think if some clubs could just get together and pick a few songs and tweak the lyrics to make it about their club, I think
Oh
there'd
yeah,
be a lot
well,
of fans that jumped on board.
That's right. South Sydney have glory, glory, South Sydney, don't they? I think, glory, glory, South Sydney. I'm not sure exactly how it goes after
Yep.
that. But of course, they were playing it at the weekend with that remarkable achievement by Alex Johnston, which we ought to talk about. That's the biggest rugby league headline worldwide in the game at the weekend. And I thought it was an absolutely sensational game between the Roosters and Souths, played in front of a full house, and Alex Johnston scored the two tries that got him the record over Ken Irvin. 213 tries now. Ken Irvin had a 212, which was quite amazing in itself. And everybody thought, that record might never be broken, but it has been, and what an achievement. What did you make of it?
Yeah, mate, I was sitting there at home watching it and just hoping that once he scored that first one, that he would cross for the second try. And I was hoping that there would be that reaction we experienced where all the fans rushed the field. There was something similar in the AFL. It might have been last year or the year before when Buddy Franklin kicked his 1,000th goal for the Sydney Swans, and we saw those great pictures of fans, lining up along the fence, getting ready to just stampede the field. And
Mm.
mate, it was just, and the try, the way he scored it, the fact that it was off I think he ran about 40 or 50 metres to score in the corner, so you could see the crowd just really getting behind him as he ran those last 10 metres or so to cross. I think it's those pictures and that moment is something that will live on in rugby league folklore for a long time to come.
Do you know what relieved me more than anything about the whole thing? It was such a relief that the bunker didn't get hold of it and disallow the try for one reason or another. Can you imagine, after all those people ran on the field, if the bunker had said, "Oh no, it's not a try after all"? How what a fantastic anticlimax that would have been, and thank goodness it didn't happen. And the fans were allowed to celebrate, and thousands of them did run on, including, of course, the Australian Prime Minister, who wanted to be in on the action, didn't he? Anthony Albanese, and he is a dedicated South Sydney supporter. So he was very keen to be seen to be running on the pitch along with all the other fans and presumably with his minders and his entourage.
And I think there was some radio commentators out there that were giving Anthony Albanese a little bit of flack for quote unquote making the big moment about him, but they need to realise that he was on the South Sydney Rabbitohs board back in the early 2000s when they got the boot from the competition, and he played a pivotal role in getting them back into the competition. So it's not like he's just put on a South Sydney Rabbitohs scarf and decided to back them. He's been a lifelong fan, and I thought it was great to see him. It was a good
Of course.
advertisement for the game, seeing him walk along the field, because we didn't see him walking along the field when Buddy Franklin kicked his 1,000th goal in
No,
the
no.
AFL.
No, it's priceless, priceless publicity. The fact that the Prime Minister of your country is there watching his team, South Sydney, and is obviously very excited to see Alex Johnston. He actually was quoted as saying some incredibly complimentary things about Alex Johnston, and saying what a great guy Alex Johnston is, and that's really obviously true. I mean, it was wonderful to see Alex's wife and presumably his father-in-law with a baby in the crowd, obviously cheering him on and looking blissfully happy. So I think the people who have criticised Albanese for being there, and I mean, he didn't make it about himself. It was all about Alex Johnston. You can't say that Albanese made it about himself. He just wanted to celebrate as everybody else did, and of course they were all risking a fine, weren't they? As well, before the game, I think Venues New South Wales, who owned the ground, had said that people who ran onto the pitch would be fined $5,500. Well, all I can say is, if they fine everybody who ran onto the pitch, Jake, they'll be able to build a brand new stadium, won't they? Because, all those thousands of people paying $5,500 each. And I noticed somebody said to Albanese, I think it was Billy Slater who said to him afterwards, weren't you risking a big fine? Wouldn't it be embarrassing for the Prime Minister to be fined $5,500 for running onto the pitch after during the game? And he just says, yeah, mate, it was worth it. It'd be worth it if I didn't get fined. It'll be worth every dollar. So, great to see. And did you notice, by the way, I think the other thing that was so impressive about the whole event was that, there wasn't a hint of violence anywhere. Everybody just wanted to congratulate Alex Johnston. And the first kid who got to him after he'd scored the try was a kid wearing a Roosters jersey. You probably noticed that, the Roosters fans were just as excited as the Rabbitohs fans. And they all, invaded the pitch wearing all the different jerseys, but they all cleared the pitch when asked to do so after the celebration had ended and the teams had gone off the pitch. They all went back to their seats. Nobody caused any trouble. There were no fights breaking out on the pitch. If that had been English soccer, I mean, goodness knows what would have happened. The fans are so antagonistic towards each other, so tribal, that I think they would have resorted to, coming into conflict. But that didn't happen at Alliance Stadium, and that's a great credit to the fans, to the NRL, to the teams, and to Australian society in general. Australian society hasn't gone so far down that tribal route that people want to fight each other just because they support different clubs. And long may that continue, mate. That you support Roosters, you support the Rabbitohs, but you're still good mates with each other, and that's the key thing. And there was a bit of controversy, by the way, as well about. Did you notice the stuff about the Roosters labelled the Rabbitohs the visitors? They didn't on the scoreboard. They didn't actually name them as South Sydney. They just had the scoreboard saying Sydney Roosters, the visitors, and the Rabbitohs were a bit cheesed off by that. And I think in future we'll find that they actually label the club with its own name and do it properly. But it was a bit of a sly dig at the Rabbitohs by the Roosters, I think, because there is a great rivalry between those two clubs, which is, I think, terrific to see. I love the rivalry between the Roosters and the Rabbitohs, and it's what generates a full house at the game. And long may that continue, Jake.
Yeah, mate, and like the stars couldn't have aligned any perfectly, or any more perfectly than what they did on the weekend. Because had he have not broken the record last weekend, I think they're playing on the Central Coast this weekend, and I'm pretty certain it's not going to draw the same crowd. And to be able to do it, as you said, against the Sydney Roosters, one of their biggest rival, it just felt like it was meant to be. And
It did.
you're absolutely right about the Roosters fans. Like, I feel like they were happy to see or witness rugby league history. They didn't care that it was against their side. They're obviously stoked that their team came away with a win in the end. But one of my good mates, Hayden, he went down and watched the match. He was actually already had a holiday planned down in Sydney, so he just so happened to be there the weekend that match was taking place, and he got to run on the field as well, and he was taking some video footage of him running out there. So he escaped a $5,000 fine, which was good to see.
You've grasped him up though now, mate. If the police find him, mate, you'll be to blame. But
I'll just beep out his name on this podcast, maybe.
No. I don't think anybody will be fined, will they? I mean, to be honest, if they tried to fine anybody, it would be absolutely outrageous because you couldn't. And if they were going to fine anybody, they'd have to start with the Prime Minister because he's the person who's obviously most identifiable. But for some strange reason, I think they will. I think they'll forego that possibility and let it rest and correctly so. I think it would be ridiculous to start fining people who ran on the field on such a joyous occasion. And you're right, it was one of those occasions that people will remember from forever and ever. Really, people will. I mean, I think they were saying on one of the other, one of the Fox broadcasts that it'll go down in history in 100 years' time. People will know that on that date the record was broken by Alex Johnston, and that's for as long as rugby league is played. I do have one slight grouch though about all this. The Australians do insist on saying that Alex Johnston is the greatest try scorer of all time. Well, he is in Australia. He is in the Australian competition. But of course, there are quite a lot of players based in England who have scored way more than 213 tries. Brian Bevan scored 700 and odd. I was just trying to work out what his total was. I think 778. I can't. I've not got the detail in front of me, but way more because he played for so many years, and obviously in our competition back in those days there were some quite weak teams that you played against. So there were very often situations where a try scorer like Brian Bevan could score 4 or 5 tries in a single game, and his tally went up accordingly. But Brian Bevan, Billy Boston, who scored 500 and odd, they all had incredible careers, and Alex is an absolutely terrific achievement, but it's an achievement in Australia, isn't it? That's the point.
Yeah, no, absolutely, mate. And I think we've got to be careful when we make that distinction that is like Australia's greatest try scorer, not generalising and saying in
Not
rugby
the
league.
world's. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I did see one stat pop up on my Facebook the other day. I'd have to go and fact check this, but it's from the random stats guy on Facebook, so usually he's pretty accurate. He said when Ken Irvine broke the all-time try scoring record in 1969, he scored 2 tries in a match. He was playing for the North Sydney Bears, and they lost 18-26 in that match. And Alex Johnston broke his record. He also lost to the Roosters 26-18. So, and he also scored 2 tries. So both scored 2 tries, and both lost 26-18.
Fascinating coincidence. I actually made a mistake, by the way, in my column this week in League Express, because I actually said Ken Irvine broke the record in 1969 and retired. He actually didn't. He played on. He broke the record in 1969, but he carried on playing till 1973, which is when he did retire with 212 tries. I think the previous record was something like 186, was it, that Harold Horder had scored, in the 1920s. A great Australian player from the very early days of the game in your country, and it was his record that Ken Irvine broke in 1969. But then Ken extended it and played on for another 4 years, and extended it to 212 tries. I've not. I don't know whether there's been any comment from any of Ken Irvine's family, his descendants, and so on, because obviously Ken died many years ago now. But it would be interesting to get a reaction from them about their great probably grandfather. Now I would think he would be the grandfather or even great grandfather's record being broken by Alex Johnston, and I'd love to see what their reaction would be.
Yeah, for sure, mate. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that did come out over the coming weeks.
Well, you'd assume that he would have some descendants, wouldn't you? But I mean, I obviously don't know that for sure, but it's more than likely, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, for sure, mate. But awesome to experience, mate. I'm glad I got to experience it in my lifetime. And yeah, no. But, mate, we've had some Challenge Cup action take place over the weekend. We might discuss that a little bit. There was a lot of big score lines, mate. But did any of the score lines surprise you from the weekend?
There were no real surprise results. The main one probably was Wakefield beating Leeds. That was the most competitive game. And Wakefield were down at half time, but rallied in the second half to beat Leeds. And I've got to say that as as a kid who started watching Wakefield many years ago, the greatest result every season was when Wakefield would beat Leeds. Wakefield's got this sort of slight big brother complex about Leeds. The city of Leeds, not very far away, a much bigger city, a much bigger club, really, in most respects. So it's always a real pleasure to beat Leeds for Wakefield fans, and they did it at the weekend, and it was a terrific performance by them. I think. The draw for the second round is going to be made later today as we speak at the moment. So we don't know yet who they've got in the next round. But I thought Wakefield were terrific. One of the things that's great for Wakefield this year, they've recruited Jack Sinfield, the son of Kevin Sinfield. They recruited him from Leeds. And Jack, who's probably just turned 20, I think now, couldn't really quite force his way in as a regular at Headingley in the last couple of years, but he's come to Wakefield, and it looks as though he is establishing himself now as a regular halfback in the Wakefield team. And the crucial moment in that game, it's a fantastic try if you get the chance to see it. In fact, if you can link to it for this podcast, I'm not sure whether you'll be able to, but if you can. It was a terrific kick from Sinfield out to the wing, just a few seconds before the half-time hooter was due to sound, and he kicked it out to the wing to Tom Johnston, and Tom Johnston just passed inside, and it was an absolutely wonderful try by, I think it was Oliver Pratt who scored it. Let me just. My memory is playing tricks on me now, but yes, it was Oliver Pratt, and because he was playing on the other wing, but he just came inside and shot to the line, and it's a wonderful try to see. It was our try of the week this week because they played such an important role in bringing Trinity back into the game. They'd been 10 points behind. After that try was scored, they were just 4 points behind at half time, and they came out in the second half and really stamped their authority on the game, much to the disappointment of the Leeds coach Brad Arthur, because the Leeds had some really good results recently, including the tremendous win over Hull KR in Las Vegas, but obviously it's Trinity that go through now, and not Leeds.
And I believe at the start of the season, John Keir looked into his crystal ball and predicted Wakefield might win the Challenge Cup this year.
He did,
Is that his
yes,
prediction?
he did. We'll have to get him back to give him the chance to brag about that prediction. Although maybe after the challenge, after they've actually won it, maybe, who knows?
Yeah.
No doubt we'll get him back at some stage fairly soon.
Yeah,
But he's always a smart predictor, is John.
he is. Yeah, he's had a few come right on this podcast. But yeah, mate, great to see Jack Sinfield seemingly fitting in there at Wakefield, and I guess every win he can get over Leeds would be even more sweeter. Yeah, I'm just looking. Leeds defeating Hull FC 16-6. Quite a tight one, but I guess Hull FC are quite depleted.
Nice that you had a great game for Lee, by the way, apparently, although I've not seen the game because there was only one game televised at the weekend in the Challenge Cup. That was Wakefield Leeds. And then the Huddersfield Hull KR game was televised, was broadcast by the Sportsman website, but not by a TV broadcaster. But those are the only two games you could actually see live at the time. So a bit disappointing. That's one reason why I've sort of written in the challenge in League Express this week and said that. And said that it's sort of diffused the momentum of the Super League. We had 4 rounds of Super League, with every game being televised, so you could really absolutely drown in Super League if you wanted to, watching as many matches as you could. But then the Challenge Cup comes along and it feels as though you're being starved of action. So it is an anticlimax, and it's very frustrating. By the way, I'm just looking at my email in tray as we speak, and we've just had an email from Leeds Rhinos saying that Mikolaj Aledzki, the prop forward, um, will leave Leeds at the end of the season. And he's going to go into the NRL. They're not saying which club he's going to join, but I think it's fairly obvious it's going to be Perth Bears, one would imagine,
Mm.
joining Harry Newman and James McDonnell, who are Leeds players who are going to be playing with the Bears next year. And that's going to be quite a blow to Leeds, I would think. And Aledzki's a real good player, and I think he'll have a lot to offer the NRL next year when he goes there. Obviously, I'm assuming it's the Perth Bears. I don't know whether they will confirm that before we finish this podcast, but who knows? It looks as though the Leeds are really being targeted by the Bears at the moment.
Yes, I wonder if they've got some scouts over there in Leeds, perhaps, or if there's any inside sources feeding Mel Meninga some intel on the players they have. But two things here. Obviously, Leeds fans will be upset to lose some of their best players, but also, if they do or he does end up at Perth, they make a pretty good case for being England's team, Perth, if they keep signing these Super League players.
Well, they're the nearest team to England, aren't they? As we've said before. I mean, if the Perth people are good at marketing, they'll do a special deal for Leeds fans to come over and watch their three ex-players making their debuts for Perth in the NRL next year. That would be a great weekend, wouldn't it? I would imagine.
Mm. Yeah, as we've said in the past, mate, you'll fly over, I'll fly over for it, and we'll have a weekend in Perth, mate.
It
Maybe
would be
Mel
terrific.
can roll
Yeah,
out the red carpet for us, perhaps.
yeah, I'd
Um,
really love to do that.
yeah, no, that'd be awesome. I haven't been to Perth before, so it'd be my first time over there.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but mate, just back on the column you wrote this week about the Challenge Cup, do you feel like the fact that some of these early rounds aren't as well publicised or televised, surely that's got to be having an impact on the crowd attendance come the final, right? If
Oh,
this was
yeah.
televised every week and we could really build up to Wembley, surely that would build a bigger crowd than what we're currently getting.
You would think so, wouldn't you? Yeah. In the old days, back when the Challenge Cup was the biggest competition in the game, it used to come in February. We used to play a season that started usually in mid August and went on to the first or second week in May. So it was really a 9-month season, more or less, in those days. Far too long in many respects, but nonetheless, the the Challenge Cup used to begin in February, roughly two-thirds of the way through the season, and its function used to be, in those days, clubs that had sort of fallen by the wayside in the league suddenly had another competition that they could um, could hang their hat on, so to speak, and hopefully contemplate doing well in. And it really revived the season for a lot of clubs. And as a result of that, it used to get great crowds. And the fact is that when the Challenge Cup came in, there were 32 clubs, and the first three rounds were played, every 2 weeks. So the competition automatically built up terrific momentum because you won your first round. The draw was normally made on television on a Monday night, and you discover who you'd be playing in 2 weeks' time. And then again, if you won the second round, you'd be in the third round and so on. And the semi-final normally came about 3 weeks after the third round. So the momentum build-up was terrific. And it all culminated normally with the Challenge Cup being played on the first weekend of May, usually, with the championship final a week later. So it led to a terrific climax to the season. And that is what's missing at the moment. It's ridiculous. It was IMG who suggested moving the Challenge Cup to an earlier slot in the season. But what that means, Jake, is that some clubs now that are struggling in the league, like Huddersfield, they're out of they've not got much chance of doing anything in the league, but they're also out of the Challenge Cup now. So they've got not that much left to play for. It's not surprising. Their crowds are dreadful, and they're really struggling. And the same is true of the other teams now that are out of the Challenge Cup. It's ridiculous to have this competition being played so early in the season for clubs to be out of it before the season is 5 weeks old. And we've got to get back, in my opinion, to the Challenge Cup fulfilling the function that it used to have, which was a major competition coming in later in the season. And until the people who run the game recognise that that's how it should be, I don't think it'll be revived, to be honest.
Yep. Mate, we'll move on to some of the other news topics surrounding the game at the moment. John Cartwright, Hull FC coach, he suggested that the speed of Super League could be what's causing player injuries at the moment. Do you feel like the game is getting faster and faster, and could this be contributing?
I think so. Yes, it is getting faster with the rucks. The ruck speed being quicker, inevitably it makes the game faster, and it makes players more exhausted, I suppose, as the game nears its closing stages. And but he may well be right that the speed of the game is emphasising injuries or creating more injuries. My suspicion, and again, it's only a suspicion. I'm not an expert. I can't claim any expertise in the field of injuries, of course. But I also think that soft pitches probably in the early part of the season play a part. A lot of English pitches early in the season are glue-pot pitches. We've had a lot of rain. They're muddy. Your feet stick in the mud. Whereas in Australia, you're coming out of summer and the pitches are much harder, and your feet don't get stuck in mud in the same way that they might do over here. And so I suspect that it's that. But again, that's only my intuition that says that. I don't know. I can't claim that I've got any medical knowledge that would support that viewpoint. But I'd certainly suggest that could be a causal factor.
Yeah, mate. And I'd like to see a study done on it, the impacts of wet weather and damp conditions, what impact that has on injuries. I'm sure. I mean, they might have already done one on a different sport potentially we could look at, but I know when the NRL brought in the 6 again rule, it felt like there was an increase of injuries in our sport. But I don't know if it's just going to take time. I feel like over the last 3 years, players have probably, their bodies have gotten used to it.
Yes.
But yeah, we'll wait and see. It's certainly in a bit of an injury crisis, the whole sport at the moment. Mate. The other thing I saw, Saints chairman Eamon McManus says owners need to be consulted on negotiations taking place with the NRL. Obviously, they should be consulted, but I guess how much of a voice or how much of an impact do you think they should have on those negotiations?
Well, quite significant, because obviously the club owners are very important stakeholders, and you can't afford to you can't afford to alienate them, because they have to keep putting money in. At the moment, they're all losing money hand over fist, and they're all having to put money into their clubs. And that situation, we're fortunate that we've got a group of owners who can continue doing that, but whether they'll be able to continue doing it forever, forever for the next several yees, is anybody's guess, isn't it? And you wonder. They clearly have to have some influence, but Peter Vlanders has kept saying that the English game needs an independent board of directors. Well, of course, they have an independent board of directors already, and that independent board is going to be rubber stamped at the Rugby League Council meeting next Tuesday. And the RFL's independent board of directors is just as independent as the Australian and NRL boards of directors. But again, you've got to recognise that the clubs themselves have a say, and Peter Vlandis himself has said that he's going to put forward this proposal, and is going to get the approval of the Australian clubs for it. Well, that's the correct thing to do, clearly. But he also has to get the support of the English clubs. He's not going to come in and buy out English Rugby League without the clubs having a considerable say in it. So, the story now seems to be that he's going to be offering the English clubs £50 million a year, as opposed to the £21.5 million they're getting from Sky at the moment. But that almost certainly would involve moving from Sky to DAZN. And I think there's a significant danger in that people are saying it's a 5-year deal. Well, I would tend to say you need 10 years of certainty probably before you would actually jump at that offer. But no doubt it's an opening gambit, Jake, and there's a lot of discussions to be had before anything is finalised. But I can say with a certain degree of knowledge that the offer hasn't been tabled yet, or at least it hadn't been a couple of days ago. Maybe in the last 24 hours, you never know. It might have been, and I've simply not been told yet. But to my knowledge, it's not been confirmed, and we'll see. We'll have to wait and see for when it does get put on the table.
Yeah, mate, and like we spoke about this in the episode last week, and we actually got a bit of feedback in the comment section from listeners. To be honest, a bit of 50-50. A lot of people are still in support of Sky, and they've claimed that they've been quite impressed with the production this year, and they feel like it's gotten better. But we've also had some supporters of DAZN. One commenter said that they had DAZN for the NFL subscription a few years back, and he said it was absolutely quality. You can watch short highlights or extended highlights, and I guess all the other content they provide as well. So, I mean, we just have to see what it looks like if they were to make that switch. But I do take your point that we've had a long relationship with Sky, and it could be a mistake if they were to walk away.
Well, it's always if you're going to get divorced from your partner, you need to make sure that you've got a better partner to go with, and you've got to form a new relationship. And just like a marriage, it doesn't always work out if you move from one relationship to another, and that's true of broadcasting agreements, isn't it? You can never be absolutely sure how well it's going to work out until you actually enter into it, and it's going to be quite It would be an incredible change for rugby league to move away from Sky and to move to DAZN. One thing, by the way, that's intrigued me: the DAZN now, of course, own Foxtel in Australia, and there hasn't been a noticeable decline in quality in the way that the NRL is covered. Although you did mention a week ago that you thought the coverage of Las Vegas wasn't as good as it had been. But nonetheless, it's interesting that DAZN, you might have thought that the Australian games that are shown in England and the 3 games a week are shown on Sky Sports, you might have thought that they would have been showing them on DAZN now. Because if DAZN own the rights in Australia, you'd have thought that they would have given DAZN in England, the streaming service, the right to broadcast those matches. But they're still with Sky Sports, and I'm very glad that they are. As a Sky Sports subscriber, it means that I can watch those NRL games, obviously with the benefit of that subscription. But it's interesting that they've not attempted to move those games over to DAZN and have retained them. They obviously have a deal with Sky to broadcast 3 games a week, and they're carrying on with it for the time being.
Yeah, and I guess one of the listeners, I believe it's Ian Edwards, he commented that the dark horse in all of this is Paramount Plus, who owns Channel 10 in Australia, and he thinks potentially Channel 5 in the UK. He says both would benefit from having the rights, and we've seen rugby league broadcast on Channel 5 in the UK before, haven't we?
No, no, not on Channel
No?
5. What's on Channel 4? Channel
Channel
4.
4, that's right.
Yeah, yeah, that's a different channel.
Yeah. So, look, I mean, there's
And
plenty of
they did a very
options.
good job as well for 2 years. And I was really disappointed when they moved away from Channel 4. To be honest, I thought they did a tremendous job. And Channel 4's HQ is based in Leeds as well, so that put them on the spot, and they had really strong production values.
Yeah, I remember watching a few of those games, mate, and I was quite impressed. I thought, yeah, they put on a really good production. So, but mate, we'll move into some other news. I saw news around the International Rugby League women's competition. It looks like they're going to scrap their tier system, coming up to the World Cup, which would see, I guess, NRLW players or other players with heritage links to other countries, allowing them the opportunity to represent, say, if there's, young Australian woman playing who has English parents, she can go and represent England. Do you think this is
Yeah,
the right move for the women's game at the moment?
really, because at the moment the Women's World Cup only has one winner, doesn't it? We all know that the Joeroos are going to win it. And New Zealand probably comes second. And I mean, we saw in Las Vegas in 2025 that the England women's team now is way behind the Australian equivalent. So if we could get one or two heritage players playing for England, it might get them, a bit closer to the Jillaroos. And the more English girls who can play in the NRLW, the better in terms of the international standing of the England women's team. But I still think whatever happens, we're going to see a fairly one-sided World Cup for the Women's World Cup, unfortunately.
Yeah, mate. And I was advocating a couple of years ago now that I really think that the two bodies should get together and stagger the English women's competition and the NRLW, so that way English women can come over and play in Australia, and our Australian women can go play in England if they like. Obviously, I think probably the England game might need a little bit more money behind the women's version of the game for that to be a possibility, but I think there'd be players that would come over and would play for free if they were just guaranteed maybe food and accommodation. And then I guess the life experience of living in England would be enough to sway some of our young ladies over
Well, let's
here.
hope so. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's an interesting. You ought to write an article for us about that, Jake. Put your thoughts down on paper and explain what those thoughts are and what the advantages are of what you're proposing, because it does sound like a really good idea to me. And the more there can be this interrelationship between the two competitions, the better it would benefit everybody, wouldn't it? The only problem is that a lot of the English girls probably would struggle to get into some of the Australian teams. But apart from that, it would certainly be great to see some of the Australian girls coming over here and playing women's rugby league over here. I think a lot of fans would turn out to watch them, because the Australian girls are getting a great status as sportswomen in the Australian sporting landscape. And the number of people who watch the Women's State of Origin, for example, is absolutely tremendous. And the more we can take advantage of that, the better.
Yeah, mate. And we do see, I think, is it Georgie Roach comes over and plays in
Yeah,
the
she plays for
NRLW?
Newcastle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, there are players that do it. I'd love to see, for instance, like Ali Brigginshaw. I think she's retiring at the end of this season. It'd be mad to see her come over and have a bit of a swan song in England, or, someone like Isabel Kelly or Jess Surges,
Oh gosh.
because, the NRLW, it starts late in our season. So, there's no reason why they couldn't come over and play a few games over in the Women's Super League. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, mate. Well, I'll put my thoughts together. I might put out some feelers. I'm sure Clint Goodchild for York, he might be keen to get a few Aussie girls over
I don't think
playing.
there's much
So
doubt about that. Yeah, Clint. I'm sure Clint would go for it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And mate, I see Oldham looks like they're still trying to find a ground, or come to some sort of resolution around where they're going to play their games. Has there been any resolution?
Well, their chairman, Bill Quinn, fell out personally with Oldham Athletic Football Club people, They banned him from the ground. I'm not sure what happened and what the cause of that was, but they've been playing games at Staley Bridge. It's such a great shame because playing at Boundary Park, they were in the in Oldham, they were starting to build up their crowds and so on, and then suddenly to have this explosive fallout has set them back an awful long way. They went to Perpignan, by the way, at the weekend and got hammered 54-0 in the Challenge Cup by the Catalans. It's not that long ago that people were saying Oldham ought to be in Super League because they were playing at a great ground at Boundary Park and so on. That's now all fallen by the wayside, and they're playing at Staley Bridge. It's extremely disappointing. Obviously, it'd be good to see them back at Boundary Park, but I don't see any sign of that happening, for the time being, which is desperately disappointing, really.
Yeah, for sure, mate. It really felt like they were starting to build some momentum over the past couple of years. So, hoping they can come to some sort of resolution and get back to playing some good rugby. Um, all right, mate. Well, how about we take a look at this weekend's matchups? Is there anything else news related you want to touch on, mate?
No, I don't think so. No, we've covered quite a bit there. So let's come to the games themselves.
Yeah. All right, mate. On Thursday night, we have Wigan taking on York.
Well, York have had a great start to the season, 2 wins from 4. They've beaten both old clubs, but I honestly can't see them winning at Wigan, despite the fact that Wigan will still be without Jay Field and Bevan French. They were without them against Bradford, another elevated club, in the Challenge Cup on the weekend, but they won quite convincingly. And I think they'll win. I think they'll be far too good for York. It's a big ask for York on a Thursday. I'm surprised that this game has been scheduled for a Thursday night, actually, because York. It's a long way for York fans to travel across the M62 on a Thursday night for an 8 o'clock kickoff, when many of them will be working the following day. They'll be getting back home well after midnight. So, I've always thought that Thursday night games should actually be local derbies in England. It would be fine for Wigan to play somebody like Warrington or Lee or somebody like that who, doesn't have so far to travel. But it seems a bit odd to give them, a game against York. I mean, if, York, an obvious Thursday night game would be York and Leeds or York and one of the Hull clubs and so on, but not travelling all that way to Wigan. But anyway, it's now in the fixture list, so we can't do much about it. But I think Wigan will win I'd say by about 30 points, probably. I think it'll be a one-sided game, unfortunately. But then again, I made the same prediction in the first week of the season when they played Hull KR, and I was revealed to be a know-nothing sort of a predictor, wasn't I? So, the York fans needn't worry too much about what I think.
That's all right, mate. I think everyone was on the same page for round one. I think we all, got that one wrong. Moving on to Friday night's matchups, mate. We have Toulouse taking on St Helens.
Well, again, Toulouse have started the Super League season well. They don't play in the Challenge Cup, so they had a free weekend at the weekend. Saints had a game at Castleford, and they've got one or two major injury problems as well. I think they're probably the second most affected club after Huddersfield. So, it could be a shock result for Toulouse, this one. I think I'm going to stick my neck out and say that Toulouse might win by about 4 points because, they lost at home to Wigan, but that was a very strong Wigan side that went there. And they only lost 16-36. They went 18 points down in the first 20 minutes, but then were more or less level pegging with Wigan for the final 60 minutes. So I think against a weakened St Helens side, they might have just enough to win it. And, Ollie Ashore-Butt at full-back is playing extremely well and is one of my favourite players in Super League. So we'll see what happens. But I think Toulouse by 4 points.
Yep. Now, next matchup on Friday night, we have Bradford taking on Huddersfield.
Well, you've got to go for Bradford. Again, 2 wins out of 4 so far. A setback at Wigan in the Cup, but I think they'll be too strong for Huddersfield. Huddersfield are playing, some young kids, giving debuts to to kids and so on with their injury crisis. I don't think they'll have many players back for this game on Friday night, and I can only see it going one way, unfortunately.
And the other matchup on Friday night, we have Wakefield taking on Lee.
Yes, this is the major TV game of the weekend. Wakefield cock a hoop after beating Leeds, but Lee obviously will be very happy that they've beaten Hull in the Challenge Cup. Lee have only won 1 out of 4 games in Super League so far, and they won't want to. They won't want to let the other clubs get away from them. So I think Wakefield have won 2 out of 4. But I think this is going to be a very important game for Lee. I think Lee might just about be able to shock Wakefield on Friday night and pull off a win by probably a real narrow margin, by about 2 points. I think it could be a really great game, but I'm just backing Lee. I think Lee will come in a very determined mood and hoping to get their Super League season back on track. And I think they might just have what it takes to edge it against Wakefield.
Yeah. Moving on to, we still got another Saturday night matchup here. Warrington taking on Cass.
Well, that's a
Saturday
game
night,
that's
yeah.
going to be televised. Yes, that's a game that's going to be televised by the BBC. Warrington unbeaten so far. They've only played 3 games, but they're unbeaten in Super League and in the Challenge Cup. Castleford I thought, were showing some signs of improvement, but they went down fairly badly against St Helens at home. And I think you've got to say Warrington should be too strong, but they will be lacking their fullback Kai Taylor-Ray, who's had a sensational start to the season, but it has got a hamstring problem that will keep him out for a few weeks. But I still think Warrington will be far too strong for Castleford, and I think they'll win by about 20 points.
It's been a seamless transition from Matt Duffy to Kai Taylor-Ray, hasn't it? Like they haven't lost anything bring him
No,
into
no,
that
not at all.
fullback
No,
jumper.
no. He's a star of the future. And by the way, Kai Taylor-Ray has appointed Isaac Moses, I think, the Australian agent, and uh, he's obviously looking to get a club in the NRL at some stage in the not too distant future. So you'll be seeing a lot more of him over there, mate.
Yeah, interesting. He's definitely one of the young players that has a lot of potential coming through. And
Yes.
Isaac Moses very rarely signs losers, mate. So
Mm.
it'd be interesting to see what his future brings. I'll move on to the other Saturday night matchup. We've got Catalans taking on Hull KR.
Well, it's an interesting game. Catalans, I think, are starting to improve. They often start the season slowly, which they did, but they've won 2 out of 4. Hull KR obviously had that terrible shock result in Vegas the week after winning the World Cup Challenge, but they've played Huddersfield twice since then and beaten them easily both times. I think this could be quite a compelling game, but I think Hull KR, who have only got 2 points from 3 games, I think they will just be a bit too strong for the Catalans on this occasion. I think they'll win by about 10 points.
And the final matchup of the round, mate, Sunday, we've got Hull FC taking on Leeds.
Well, that's always a great game. Again, Hull is another team. I mean, Hull likes to think of itself as the capital of rugby league in this country, but Leeds obviously would probably contest that description. And it's always a great game between two big clubs, and I think Leeds will probably prevail by about 10 points. They'll bounce back from that disappointment in the Challenge Cup, and Hull have still got a lot of players out. Obviously, they've lost Will Price, their fullback, for the rest of the season, which is disastrous, really, from their point of view. And I think they will not quite be strong enough to compete with Leeds. I see Leeds winning by about 12 points in that game.
Well, mate, it's set to be a pretty good weekend of matchups. I'm looking forward to it. I'll be
One of
making
the
an
games
effort
I
to.
want to mention, by the way, is your team, Brisbane, going to Melbourne on
Oh, mate,
Friday. That's
yeah,
0 from 2, and it could be 0 from 3, couldn't it?
mate, it's you couldn't have asked for a tougher opponent after two straight losses, going down to Melbourne and playing against the Storm,
Yeah.
who are in fine form themselves. It's going to be a big ask, mate. I know Madge, he's announced his team list this afternoon. There's been a few changes
I think
I think,
Shibasaki's been dropped, hasn't he, from Brisbane?
yeah, he's still on the bench. I think he's in the 17 jumper. They've brought in Anderson, the recruit from Storm, and he's going to play on the wing. They're going to move Dean Mariner into centre. Also, believe they've got Xavier Willison promoted to the starting side in the back row in place of Jack Golszewski. So I guess he's hoping that those changes will, shore up the defensive line a little bit. Because the way they started the other night was great, but they let Parramatta get back into it, and they shouldn't have lost that game after how well they started. But it just goes to show how quickly momentum has been swinging in the
Oh,
matches
gosh, yeah.
this year. So no one's safe. Doesn't matter what lead you get out to, no one's safe.
No, that's right. But I'll tell you what, the kid who's impressed me is this youngster of Falongo, the Melbourne Storm full-back, who's taken over from Ryan Pappenhausen, and he's taken his chance with both hands, hasn't he? And looks an absolutely terrific player. And you're going to have Reece Walsh on one side and Falongo on the other side playing at full-back. That's going to be great to watch, isn't it? It really is going to be great to watch.
Oh yeah, mate, and makes you wonder who is the Melbourne Storm, fullback scout, because they rarely miss a good fullback, do they? You've got Billy Slater, obviously Cameron Munster came through as a fullback, Jerome Hughes started as a fullback, Pappenhausen, now
Mm.
Farlongo. Throw in Scott Drinkwater, the Cowboys fullback. They just seem to know how to pick him.
Well, the
But
interesting
yeah,
thing about Falongo is that he's actually a Victorian Rugby League junior. They've actually plucked him out of their own system in the state of Victoria. There are very few Vi- Victorians who have played for the Storm, but he is certainly one of them. And gosh, if there are more like where he came from, then it's going to, the Storm has got a great future because they've got a monopoly on all that talent, haven't they?
yeah, no, it's exciting times, I think, for rugby league in Victoria, mate. And as you said, hopefully they can keep developing those juniors. Um, all right, Martin. Well, anything else you want to touch on before we get out of here today, mate?
No, we'll call it a draw
Wrapping
there,
up well.
mate. And we've been talking for an hour. I didn't think
Yeah,
we'd manage it, or more than an hour actually. I didn't
yeah.
think we'd manage it today, but we have done, and I hope people enjoy listening to us rabbiting on.
Oh, absolutely, mate. And as you said, like we were talking before the podcast, obviously when games aren't televised, it's a little bit harder to talk about them. But yeah, we still managed to find a way to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
All right,
Thanks
mate.
to
Well,
Will Johnson, actually, because we spent a lot of time talking about him. But yeah,
yeah,
congratulations to him, by the way, from both of us. I think we've got to say.
yeah, absolutely, mate. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be alive when the record's broken next. It's a big ask, but
You never
yeah,
know.
we'll see. We'll see. All right,
Mm.
Martin. We'll wrap it up here and do it again next week, eh?
Great stuff. Thanks, Jake.
Thanks, mate.